Thanks for two very interesting presentations. I had a question for Steve Kinsella. The stock flow norms, picking a particular value for a stock flow norm, it reminded me of some debates over calibration of environmental policy models. So it's related to, but a bit different from the Lucas critique, where you rely on estimates from past data about what could happen in a counterfactual future. And it seems to me that you've got to have some behavioral assumptions in there just to make the model move. And could you say something about how those behavioral parameters are established in practice?
Would you like to answer the question?
Yeah. I have an additional question for Steve. I was intrigued by your whole presentation, so that was very nice, but I was wondering about what you said about the mean reverting process, or at least the inherent stability properties, although they're not stability properties. Maybe you could expand a little bit more on that, because I think that's very important for those working with these models.
Thanks both speakers for their presentations. Two short questions. The first one is to Jesper. You said that public sector should do it, but this is outside the European Union regime. Is that maybe one of the economic explanations or reasons for the Brexit? And because you also mentioned that they have a different kind of definition of deficits. And the second question is also short and maybe also for you, but comes in my mind. You kept repeating that macroeconomics is misunderstood. So what the austerity policies, regarding the austerity policies, but I don't think that Merkel is acting on a misunderstanding. I mean, they're doing it on some purpose. What they're doing. So how can we, convince, or what would be the your response to this? Thank you.
Should we take some answers, comments?
All right. Yes. Well, Brexit is about sovereignty. And a part of sovereignty, the debate of sovereignty, is also, leeway and possibilities within fiscal policy. Because, as you know, UK is not a member of the Eurozone, so the arguments about monetary policy and exchange rate policy is not that relevant. But, they are. It's not a major argument because, as I just mentioned, the UK government has another opinion and have followed another opinion because they're breaking both rules, the 3% rule, and they have not signed up to the fiscal compact, but they are obviously breaking this idea of only 0.5% deficit on the structural budget. So Brexit about sovereignty. Why does so many economists subscribe to the general equilibrium model? One can only speculate. And one can only speculate why empirical evidence has a little impact on theories, which usually, but at least should be taken into consideration. And if this, who said that yesterday, the so-called, that was Mogens Lykketoft, the so-called economic science should be taken seriously, then serious economists cannot go on denying reality. So, and then we start to speculate on ideology, and that's, more for the political science than for me. But I'm just astonished that so little empirical evidence make an impact into the ivory tower of general equilibrium. Maybe because it's more easy, more convenient just to repeat the same old story and you get a high salary.
One of the things I think that is overlooked when macroeconomists discuss the European crisis is the role that individual political mandates play in the construction of economic policy. So Wolfgang Schäuble is not the Minister for Finance of the European Union, he's the Minister for Finance of Germany. He is responsible for the finances of that country. And when you rock up to the Minister of Finance of a country and you say, hi, I'd really like to spend your taxpayers' money on a group of people who the media in your country have demonized for 5 years as being lazy, profligate, party having losers. It is natural that you will say, no, I don't think that. And lots of people have dressed this up as being ordo-liberal versus social democratic and all that stuff. It has nothing to do with any of that. Those are retrospective justifications for a policy that essentially says, I am not lending you my credit card because I don't believe that you will spend it wisely. And the fiscal rules are nothing more than that. They happen to be absolutely terrible economics. They're great politics. Brilliant politics. You rock up to a finance minister and you say, listen, I know you would spend the earth if I gave it to you to get re-elected, but I'm not going to let you because there's some magic rule in the sky which says that you can't. And most politicians recognize that that actually gives them a way to be more prudent. They can say to the finance ministers can say to their colleagues, the education minister, the health minister, the social protection minister, they can say, well, look, I'd love to give you more money, but I can't because of this. And so your question was, how do you get out of it? And the answer is roads. Politicians they're simple creatures. They need, but what's really important about them is they need to have a story that they can both understand and they can sell to their average constituents. If you drive the roads in Germany, they're not brilliant. That's because of Jesper's line spin. I'm being very nice when I'm saying they're not brilliant. It's one of the richest economies on earth and you're like swerving around as if you're in a video game, trying to avoid the potholes. So the answer is roads and kind of pan-European capital projects. And I think everybody can get behind that because everybody understands that roads and infrastructural projects like that are really good. What about a pan-European maternity policy? Right, we want our infant mortality rates across the Eurozone. There's actually a remarkable divergence in infant mortality rates. And it actually has a lot to do with, not with the way the doctors are trained, but the hospitals that the doctors and nurses work in. Right? So I think, projects like that, we're going to fix all the roads. We're going to fix all the maternity hospitals in Europe. We're going to fix the crumbling pension system, stuff like that. You can, all of that is basically political cover for spend more money, right? And you could do that by enhancing the mandate of the European Investment Bank. Many people have talked about this, but that is the genuine answer. The answer is capital expenditure, which would raise that real investment line. I totally agree with you that the private sector doesn't adjust fully at all. But that's why you will have better macroeconomics if you have better economic policy to guide it. I think that's the way the causality goes.
Yeah, just very short response to this. Actually, they did this in East Germany. The roads in East Germany are better than in West Germany. But they found that it didn't really worked out. So, yeah, maybe with a health issue it could work out, but I mean, it's a paradoxical situation because in one part of the country the roads are completely new and in the other not.
I think there you need to, so my wife is German and I spent a fair bit of time thinking about the German case because, they told us what to do in Ireland for 3 years, so they're probably still telling us what to do. I've thought about this a lot, and I had this really weird experience where we had advised the Troika when they came to Ireland. So it was me and 4 other economists. When they came into the room, like, have you guys all seen Star Trek? You know the Borg? That's how they came in the room. There were 5 of us, and we were in a room, like a line like this, and 50 of them came in, and only 3 of them spoke. It was really, really creepy, actually. Anyway, yeah. I was trying to explain this kind of stuff to them, and you know, it's interesting. A lot of them actually accept that argument, but what they come back to you and say is, look, we can't sell that. But anyway, go back to the German case. Going back to the German case, the roads that were built in East Germany were built by West German firms, right? They weren't built by East German firms. So where did the money go, right? It went back the other way. So this is where you have to look at the flow. Where does the flow go? Mean reverting. So the notion of mean reverting is, I'm trying to explain this idea of a stock flow norm and Godley's basic argument, Lavoie's basic argument, that kind of stuff, to people who they're not. It's not that they're not interested; they're just skeptical. They want the elevator answer, right? And so I explain the idea of a stock flow norm, and the idea was like, okay, this thing is expanding and it can't expand forever and has to contract back to some point. But it's not that it will always relax back to whatever it was before. It was at 50%, it'll come back to 50%. It's not the argument that I was making. It's more that things that are unsustainable cannot be sustained, right? So implicitly there is no idea of relaxation back to some equilibrium. I don't think there is one, frankly. I do believe that the economy is coherent at the balance sheet level. I think that's pretty well established. And I do believe that you can't have divergent processes forever, but I don't have this notion that there's a point at which we're all aiming for. I think that we could be a lot better. I think Morshaik has a good paper where he talks about this notion of a stationary state, a steady state, and these ideas of what is going towards, right? What does a self-enforcing equilibrium, right? Self-enforcing stationary state look like? I think that's important. To the question of where these parameters come from, some of the time they come from previous econometric studies, right? That the A and B variables there, like they're very well studied, right? But one of the interesting things that I learned in this process is that, and I gave you guys an example from the household sector, right? We all have really good intuition about the household sector. We're all trained in mainstream models and in other types of models to think about the household sector, and we all have pretty good intuition. Like if I asked you guys what you thought if what you thought the marginal propensity to consume out of current income was in Denmark, you'd all have a rough number, and I bet you that number would be something like 0.9, something like that, right? It might be 0.105, 1.05, it might be something smaller, but you'd all have a rough number, right? So your training and your intuition gives you a sense of that. When you move to the non-financial corporate sector, you've all worked in businesses, you do have a sense, a feeling for what that number would be. When you move to the ICPF sector and you're looking at, debentures or something, you have no intuition. Your intuition vanishes because we're not trained to think in this way. And so there you have to rely on econometric studies and a fair bit of working with the parameters to see which ones look sensible. So for example, when you're calibrating portfolio equations, I know this is something Antoine Godin's going to talk about in a while, it is a non-trivial process to get those numbers that they look right, they make sense over time, right? It's also a non-trivial process to get, if you've got 60 or 70 equations, getting all the parameters, econometrically we talk about getting them into the unit circle, but getting them to cohere in a particular way is a challenge, and something that I still don't think there's a consistent convention for, Like there's a convention for how one specifies the parameters of the DSGE model. It's almost like a prayer. If any of you guys read that DSGE literature, if you look at the format of all the papers, they're all the same. And they do a variation on the prayer. each time. We don't have that. I mean, we have the Pope of stock flow macro here, so he could give us the prayer, but he may not want to. But I think where you can be guided by intuition, go with that. Where you can't, rely on econometrics or some kind of external trend analysis.
One last question.
Yeah,
Just two short comments and
His Holiness himself.
and one question for Jesper. The first comment is about you mentioned the QFO and Rosenbaum article saying that it was showing that under most of the parameter values the model was stock flow models were unstable. But it seems nobody has noticed that when they are looking at the range of parameters, they're looking at the propensity to consume out of wealth, and they look at from 0 to 1, which is absurd. As you showed in your own numbers, we know that the propensity to consume out of wealth is around 0.03 or something like that. So, I mean, the method they use is very useful, but I don't know the results they get make no sense. About Jesper, you asked us to give you a comment. So you're using the term balance of payments, but what you're really meaning is current account balance. And the other question, you referred to Warren Mosler a number of times, and so I was wondering, how do you relate to the statement made by Warren yesterday that taxation was associated with high rates of unemployment, when in your own numbers you're showing us that unemployment is related to large government deficits?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you better do.
I might talk about the Mosler one too. Anyway, so the Rosenbaum one, yes, that is true. They I think what is interesting about their paper is that it's the first kind of really serious attempt to estimate the whole parameter space for a stock flow model. That's why it's interesting. There are a couple of exercises in that where it's economically meaningless, I would say. But for them, for example, they talk about bond issuances as well, from 0 to 1. I think they're looking for elements of the story that fit the method and not the other way around. I don't think they would claim that they got the answer correct, but yeah, that's absolutely right. I have a comment on the Mosler thing too, but maybe I'll let Jesper talk about it.
Yeah, well, you are right. The balance of payments, current account. My reference to Mosler, because I thought it was refreshing to hear him giving his presentation. The core question is, what would you do if you, being in government and being responsible for employment, what would you do if there is an obvious lack of effective demand? I think that's a core question. And effective demand could be increased in a number of ways. And still, I think this is the challenge to our profession, that how can one deny that if there is a lack of effective demand inside the private sector, well then some kind of an external force has to lift the boat, or the boats. Otherwise, it will just go on dragging along. So this is not, and here there is a number of possibilities. Taxation is just one way that's increasing the disposable income of households, and so on. We know the policy instruments. But I think the core is, if there is a lack have affected demand? What would a responsible government do if employment is a part of the political platform?
So, my comment on Moser's paper, sermon, whatever, was like, I think his analysis is maybe correct for the United States after 1945. Right. I don't think it's accurate for Pompeii. I feel bad for the tour guide. Poor bastard. You know, he just wants to get through the day. You know, I just felt really bad for the guy. So if that argument is true, then economies that don't have their own monetary policy, and there are loads of economies that don't have their own monetary policy, either because they're locked into currency unions or because they're hard pegged to some other currency or whatever. They don't really have independent monetary policy. They don't have issuance powers over the money supply. But also they're constrained by fiscal rules. So there are many, many, many countries in the world that have fiscal rules. So Warren's policy prescription for these guys is impossible. You can't go to Spanish government and say, listen, son, the way forward here is reduce taxes, cause a massive budget deficit, and increase your spending, cause a massive budget deficit, and plug the hole with money that you've printed off. It's illegal to do the first thing, it's illegal to do the second thing, and it's super illegal to do the third thing. Article 123 of the Maastricht Treaty. I mean, they'd kick you out of the Eurozone before they let you do that. I happen to come from a country that tried the whole deficit financing thing to fill some banks' balance sheets. And it was a fairly unpleasant experience. And it used as an instructive example against it. It is interesting that this description is institutionally inaccurate, I would imagine, for large parts of the world. And I think if there's one thing that defines heterodox economics, broadly speaking, it's faithfulness and sort of a care and attention to institutional detail. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important. You can't rock up to a country like Spain and say, lads, deficit financing is the answer, just drop taxes. They'll go, well, thank you for coming. That's the door. It's illegal for them to do it. So you have to be careful to nuance the stuff. If you're if you're a realist, and you're a holist or whatever, then you might holist, but you might.
So what are you saying, that Spain should leave the Eurozone?
No, absolutely not. But my point is, if your policy prescription is that I have a toothache and I should chop off my face, right? I'm going to say, well, no, I don't think that's helpful, right? I think that there are ways around it, but now they're about institutionally working within the Eurozone to change, first off, most importantly, how the structural budget deficit is calculated. It's calculated using a production function, seriously, there's a production function at the heart of the constitutions of the members of the Union. It's a scary thought. But if you could change how those things were adjusted, you'd actually give that's a genuine thing that you could do. A really constructive critique, and that's where I think a lot of this kind of work can be done, where it could be very helpful.
Could I just add that I
Must
slightly...
be a short one before.
Yeah, I will be short. That I fully understand your viewpoints, but I slightly disagree what the role of the economists are. Is that to advise politicians, or is it to get a better understanding of how the economic system is working? And when we have got this understanding, then we can answer political questions. But I don't think it's for us to come up with policy recommendation as such. Of course, it's difficult to avoid, I know. But I think really this is to understand the material, and then we can give better and coherent answers to political questions.
And we have to leave it there. Thank you very much.